Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. As I'm recording this, the United States is deep into negotiations with the Taliban over some sort of political arrangement that would enable the Taliban's entrance into Afghan politics while the U.S. drew down its troop levels. The specifics of these negotiations are opaque. Not much is known about what is on the table. What we do know is that there are precisely 0 Afghan women at the table. And what we also know, thanks to research done in part by my guest today, Anna Tonelli, is that the exclusion of women from peace negotiations is a predictor of failure for those negotiations. When women are excluded from peace talks, those peace talks are less likely to result in any durable success, according to many studies. Anna Tonelli is the Inclusive Peace and Security Senior Policy Advisor with Oxfam International, and in this conversation, we discuss some of the research that links the success of peace talks to the inclusion of women. We discuss examples from around the world, but kick off with the situation in Afghanistan. I think you'll appreciate this conversation. It brings together a lot of trends under the rubric of women, peace, and security. As always, I love hearing from you guys. Send me an email using the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com or hit me up on Twitter at Mark L. Goldberg to let me know what is on your mind. If you have suggestions of people I should interview or topics I should cover, let me know. I love hearing from you. All right, now here is my conversation with Anna Tonelli of Oxfam International.
So at this point, what we know is that there are no women involved in those negotiations. And in part, that's because right now it's only between the Taliban and the U.S. government for the most part. In terms of the Afghan government, they do have a negotiation team, which is made up of 11 members, only 3 of whom are women. But they, again, have not been included in these talks thus far, and so at this point, no women have been engaged in these initial negotiations, or really initial talks, we could say.
And the fear is, of course, that the U.S. will sort of trade away these hard-won women's rights in Afghanistan in negotiations with the Taliban.
Absolutely, and I think the real sort of challenge here is that ever since the fall of the Taliban in 2001, the international community has really equated progress in Afghanistan with the empowerment of Afghan women. There's been quite a bit of attention given to the plight of women in the country, and as well as a lot of resources poured into, for example, women's access to education, to really ensuring that the hard sort of lack of opportunities that existed under the Taliban regime and really the great oppression women faced were reversed. And so at this point, you have some really hard-fought rights that are now enshrined in the 2000 Constitution that was signed in 2004, which guarantees women's equality before the law in Article 22, the right to education in Articles 43 and 44, as well as the right to work in Article 48. And so while these rights are enshrined, the challenge with these negotiations are that the Taliban are interested in reopening discussions on the Constitution itself. So there's a real fear from women that without having explicit guarantees that women's rights are non-negotiable, that the Constitution is, at least when it comes to women's rights and really to media freedom as well, that those are held and not lost. Without that guarantee, there's room for the sort of backward sliding into what was Afghanistan in before 2001. And I think too there's this real fear from the narrative that's being delivered from the global north, so beyond the US, but also Europe, of just feeling sort of fed up with supporting investment in this conflict and really wanting to see an end to the war. And so women are fearful that this desire to see peace will be overshadowed by what will be lost in order to gain that quote
It'll
unquote
be
peace.
like an expeditious way of accelerating peace talks with the Taliban would be to just do away with these gains in women's rights. But again, you said earlier that the sort of formal negotiating team from the Afghan government includes 3 women. They're of course being sidelined. The entire Afghan government is being sidelined in these talks between the U.S. and the Taliban. But in general, who are these 3 women?
They are government representatives. So this government team of women, this government team has 3 women who are members of government, different departments, and they of course are I would say a little bit more on the progressive side of women in society, but they're government women, and so there's been quite a bit of pressure on the Afghanistan government by the U.S. To kind of be pushing for this peace, to be calling the Taliban to the negotiation table. And so while there are women at the table, there's also a fear that these women might not be able to necessarily represent or put pressure during talks, in favor of women's rights, given that they're not 50% of the negotiating party, they're only 3. And furthermore, because again, the immense pressure from the U.S. on the government itself might mean that they have to sort of side with what politically makes the most sense versus what they as individuals or as women might think is critical. And this this really speaks to why in peace negotiations, of course, women's inclusion is critical. Having what we call a critical mass, which would be according to research is 30% women, which they're nearly there with the government negotiation, but also having connections to other aspects of peace building within society is really important. So, these women aren't necessarily representative of broad civil society. They themselves are members of the elite. They are members of the government. So ensuring that this peace process also is connected and reflective of the realities in Afghanistan, it will also be critical. So in the case of Afghanistan, we have also this High Advisory Council, and this High Advisory Council is meant to be providing support to the government negotiation team, and giving guidance around sort of what should be negotiated, and really trying to share perspectives from a broader subset of society in Afghanistan. And on that body, there are 32 members, and only 2 are women. And these women happen to be from a more conservative subset of Afghanistan's society, which does not represent the majority of women in Afghanistan, and certainly does not really provide an opportunity for those young women who have grown up now under a very, very different country with freedoms, with access to education, who have a different perception of the world. The globe is much more accessible now through social media and just a lot of the internet freedoms that exist. And their voices are being they're not represented in this advisory body either.
So it seems over recent years there has been greater attention to the value of including women in peace processes, and the fact that you have the title that you have at Oxfam, I think, speaks directly to that. That there is more attention, and there's been also some research and like a lot of research done on what it means to include women in peace talks and how that impacts the outcome of peace talks. Can you talk a little bit about what we know so far, like what the research says about what happens when peace negotiations, when women are included versus excluded?
So in terms of their inclusion, yes, you're correct. There's been quite a bit of research done. So this was all birthed out of the UN passed a resolution called 1325, which called for women's inclusion in peace and security decision-making, recognizing that not only their inclusion was critical in order to realize sustainable peace, but also that they had a right to be present, in large part given the the great impact conflict often has on women. So through, over the years, this resolution was passed back in 2000. So we're getting close to the 20th anniversary. So there's been quite a bit of evidence-based research done to really bolster the advocacy around ensuring this resolution is realized, because we still see, like in the case of Afghanistan, there's not, there isn't consistent inclusion of women. Out of the 23 rounds of peace talks in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2014, women were only included in 5 of those talks. So it was not an impressive showing. So in terms of what we're seeing research-wise and why this matters, you have statistics like the participation of civil society groups, including women's organizations especially, makes a peace agreement 64% less likely to fail. When women participate in peace processes, the resulting agreement is 35% more likely to last at least 13 years. And a lot of this is due to, from sort of the more anecdotal research that's been done, or more qualitative versus quantitative. You have examples of how women address, when they are brought to the table, women address issues beyond positions in power, which is often what...
So what's an example of something like that?
Sure. So in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, they use their access to the talks to influence the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. And they brought a greater focus on social issues to the agenda. So this was looking at access to education, refugee issues as well, inclusion of language on victims' rights and reconciliation was another aspect. There was another.
And the idea is that like the official negotiators, who are mostly men, wouldn't sort of pay sufficient attention to those issues, which ended up being like very important to the, actual people affected by these negotiations.
Right. I mean, for the most part, you see in conflict negotiations. So, for example, in South Sudan, the President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar and their negotiating teams were arguing over positions in power. The most emphasis of the talks ended up being on who would be vice president and who would be president, which then resulted in a president and 5 vice presidents, because they couldn't figure out, who within the negotiations would fit the bill, basically. Whereas you had women there asking for, ensuring that the oil concessions that are going to be decided out of these negotiations are going to the communities themselves, so that the profits are benefiting the community to be able to invest in schools, in hospitals, in infrastructure. So the difference you often see is that you have, or in Liberia, you had, again, the parties to the conflict fighting over once more positions in power, whereas women were there, protesting outside the halls, literally chaining themselves around the entire building so that, the negotiating teams couldn't leave until they actually came to an agreement, because they were, years in now of their children being out of school, of lack of access to food, of, constantly being on the run due to the conflict that was ongoing.
Well, like Liberia seems to be an interesting example, just for the fact that like there were no women as like the formal negotiators, but women heavily influenced the outcome through sort of civil society participation.
Correct. And that, there are different, having women, the push for women at the table is still vital in that, they do impact the content of the agreement very often. And so, you have Northern Ireland, Good Friday Agreement, concessions for victims' rights, etc. You had in South Sudan, it was there was a quota that was decided upon for women's inclusion of 35% in the transitional government mechanisms. That wouldn't have been there if women weren't there fighting for it. In fact, there was quite the energetic negotiation around that when it was happening. But there are other modalities for inclusion. And Tanya Puffinholtz, who's a researcher at IPTI, has done a lot of looking into...
What's IPTI?
It's the Institute for... Oh, gosh, now.
I'm usually pretty good at these things. You stumped me. You stumped me on this one. Oh, man.
So it's at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, but I'm now
Right.
blanking on what.
That's all right. I'll add it at the
PTS.
end.
Okay. So she's done quite a bit of research looking at, more than 40 peace processes in 35 countries over the last 3 decades, really trying to untangle how women were able to effectively influence a peace process. What were the types of approaches that they took in order to engage? And so she came up with these 7 modalities of inclusion. The first is, of course, direct representation at the negotiating table. And that was either women's inclusion within delegations or women creating their own delegation. So in the case of Northern Ireland, for example, women went out and actually campaigned to create their own political party because it was only political parties who were invited to the table, and those political parties kept excluding women. And so instead of, fighting for access there, they just went off and made their own political party to then be able to engage in the negotiations. You also have observer status, and that is something that South Sudan, their peace process, included. So you had women who weren't able to negotiate, weren't able to be vocal during negotiations in the room, but were observing everything that was happening. So did a lot of what we would call guerrilla advocacy, where you're, in the corridors of the hallway talking and trying to mediate between parties based off of what you've observed in the actual negotiations. The other means of inclusion are consultations. And it can be either official or unofficial. But, you have the case of right now, Special Envoy Martin Griffiths, who's leading the Yemen peace process, has been consulting with women, although there have not been impressive representation of women during the negotiations. We've only had actually one woman on the government delegation. You have had, the Special Envoy's office attempting to at least meet with women's groups to solicit their thoughts on what the real cause of conflict is and possible, solutions to those causes. You also have inclusive commissions. So commissions that are, meant to be deciding sort of like the transitional government once a peace agreement has been signed. So in South Sudan, you have a number of commissions that have been set up to actually implement the peace agreement. And these commissions are sometimes even more important than actually the negotiations, in that they really see through the implementation of what's been agreed to. And so women's inclusion there is also critical in terms of ensuring, for example, right now we're having an issue with the 35% quota being met in South Sudan. So you have commissions that are moving ahead without having fulfilled that agreement. So there's been quite a bit of advocacy from women on the ground to be pushing for their inclusion there. Then the last 3 are high-level problem-solving workshops. So that can be, a member state. So, for example, in the case of, let's see, even the U.S. sort of, or actually a better example is Germany. In terms of in 2005, they invited the U.S. and the Taliban to sort of a problem-solving workshop, in as much as that, to really start trying to find in what way negotiations could become possible. So that is also a key area for women's inclusion, in that it really is setting the stage for what's going to be discussed and what the sticking points are and what parties aren't willing to concede on. And then the last 2 are public decision making. So women's participation in referendums are critical. In the case of South Sudan, you had more than 50% of those who voted for South Sudan's secession from Sudan after a conflict that went on for more than 20 years were women. So it's another critical element for their inclusion. And then finally, mass action. And that's really the case for Liberia, where you saw women mobilizing for peace and doing various public actions, whether it was protesting along the route where the negotiating team would drive past every day, to literally linking arms around the doors to the negotiating room to protest any member of the delegation's departure prior to coming to a resolution around the conflict.
Is there an example of a peace process that you and colleagues of yours who focus on issues around inclusion, hold up as like a great example of inclusion done right?
That's a great question.
I mean, I suppose there's maybe like no perfect example. I was stunned just in preparing for this interview to see, for example, that like the official delegations in the Colombia peace process seem to include like a heavy number of women, like more than half, at least from the FARC side, were women, according to data I saw. But yeah, we're still, I suppose, early in that peace process. But I guess I'm wondering if there are, in general, examples of some of the elements you've described sort of done really sort of well, that could possibly be emulated in other situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think Colombia is a really good example. And it's particularly the peace agreement itself is a really good example of what can come out of negotiations that are more inclusive, in that the gender language is extraordinarily progressive. There's, calling for human rights, more institutionalizing of human rights within the post-conflict transitional bodies. You have, a real, just a more gender-sensitive focus on disarmament. So I think that, yeah, the peace agreement itself does stand as an example. I would also say, Guatemala is not in the greatest state presently, but after their civil war, there was, the peace process took quite a while. There were a number of iterations, but there was a very, effective structure that ensured a breadth of that society was included. So you had mechanisms whereby, the tradespeople had their own commission, women civil society had their own commission, businesses had their own commission, and all of them met, separately, but then also served as representatives to the negotiations. And so it provided more of like a feedback loop that was really critical to understanding kind of what the positions were of, broader society around the conflict and where they, what kind of a future society they wanted to be a part of. South Sudan's most recent peace process, so that was the agreement was just signed last year. And there was representation in that. You had women on the negotiation team, you had women as an observer group, you actually had civil society as an observer group as well. And again, the agreement that came out of it was quite progressive, comparatively speaking to like a lot of their African neighbors. But the challenge is also, the implementation. So I think one of the things that we get stuck on, particularly here at the UN, is, to ensure that the peace process itself is inclusive, but then we don't look to really follow up on the implementation. And that's really where the hard part comes, because it's redesigning government structures, it's redesigning economic relationships, it's deciding where funding is going in terms of to schools, what kind of truth and reconciliation mechanisms are stood up to address the grievances of conflict. And, without, I think that's, in the case of Guatemala, that was not as successful as one would have hoped. And Colombia right now is facing a lot of challenges in this as well, in particular because of all of the really progressive gender language and, real calls for women's inclusion. There's been actually a backlash on women in Colombia with heightened levels of sexual and gender-based violence being reported, because a lot of what's called for in that agreement is to really transform the country into a more, progressive, fairer society. And so, I think that, this is why it's so critical to have an inclusive peace agreement, is because it can lay out a new architecture for a fairer society and restructure power relations and, make more inclusive socioeconomic policies, or, really replace some of the unjust structures and policies that were the cause of conflict in the first place. But, the agreement itself, once laid out, really does need that follow up and that implementation in order for that to be realized. And so women's and greater society's inclusion in that process continues to be important.
So we started off talking about Afghanistan, and maybe that's where I'd like to end. I mean, is it fair to say that to the extent that women are excluded from peace processes in Afghanistan, whether that's the U.S. talks with the Taliban or official government talks with various entities, including the Taliban, to the extent that women are excluded, is it fair to suggest, or does like the research suggest, that the resulting agreement won't hold and won't be successful?
Yeah, I would say that is the case. I mean, if you think about it, if you don't have 50% of the population represented who have been, honestly, in the case of Afghanistan, you could argue more impacted by the conflict, and would be more impacted by, a reversal to Taliban rule. You don't have that perspective. You don't have, like one example that I can give is you have when it comes to countering violent extremism, women's inclusion is just as important. And part of the reason is, in societies, for instance, in Afghanistan, where it is more conservative and you don't have the ability to, as a man, meet with women, for example, given the level of conservativeness. Women's perspective, like what they see on a daily basis, is totally absent. You're like looking with one eye. In Pakistan, women's groups, after there was finally women in the police force in Pakistan, they were able to meet with women one-on-one in these more conservative subsets, in the Fatah region where the Taliban and ISIS are present. And they got, just so much more information in terms of intelligence around, like, men moving about in large caravans or caches of weapons, things of that nature, because, they, as women, were a bit more attuned to sort of the coming and going of their, brothers or fathers or just the community more broadly. And, they weren't able to access that information until you had, women able to communicate with them, to gather that information. So I think, it is definitely, sorry, I'm rambling here.
No, that's all right.
I do think that you have the Taliban, the history of how they've ruled, and what I've seen, at least from the type of rhetoric that they're delivering during the talks, are not interested in a society that is supportive of women's freedom. And it's...
Well, then how do you bring them into a peace agreement? I mean, they are a belligerent, the goal of these peace agreements is to get the belligerents to lay down their arms and participate in normal politics. I mean, that's kind of like the Colombia model, right?
Right.
So how do you sort of, when you have a group that's sort of animated by this fundamentalist ideology, how do you sort of persuade them, to drop their arms, and how do you not trade away, women's rights in that situation?
I mean, I think there are ways in which, I think that the Afghans themselves need to be able to kind of lay this out. I guess I just don't have as much faith in the United States deciding on behalf of, the country of Afghanistan, how the Taliban will be engaged in this peace process, or what concessions are or are not okay to be making. And I think that's something that, Afghans beyond just women are concerned about, in that it seems like this peace process is being driven by the United States and outsiders, and they are being neglected from really contributing in any way. So one, I think that there are solutions and answers within Afghan society. You have groups that have been living, or not groups, but you have communities that have been living in close quarters with the Taliban who aren't under Taliban rule for years. You have, scenarios in which women have been negotiating, whether via Taliban's wives, to, ensure access to school, for example, for their children. So you have women who are bridging divides in that way, using other women to try and see what possibilities exist for making small concessions here and there. So I think that there are solutions that lay within Afghan society if they were provided the opportunity to really be engaging in these talks. I think too it's a challenging discussion, but it's like, if we can't ensure women's rights, then what kind of a peace will this be? You have research done by Valerie Hudson she wrote a book called Sex and World Peace. And, she did a statistical analysis of the status of women in the world. And it shows that where women are more empowered, particularly in public spheres of life, countries are less likely to go to war with their neighbors, to be rife with conflict and crime within their society and violence. You also have research that came out of this showing that gender inequality has been revealed as a predictor of armed conflict, whether measuring, conflict between states or within states. So there's also, this is still an ongoing research project, but there's more and more evidence coming out that inequality in a country does point to a greater likelihood of violence and conflict. And so, if we are to give up women's rights in order to have a peace with the Taliban, what kind of peace will that look like? And if we look back to prior to 2001, what kind of a society, really was that? Not even just for women, beyond women. So I think, that it's not just that, I think it's a question of whether or not the country can truly be at a sustainable peace if women's rights are overlooked. And so it might take more time to be figuring out to what extent negotiations, have to go through in order to get to an agreement that works with the Taliban. But it's certainly not something that we can rush.
Anna, thank you so much for your time. This was clarifying, helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Anna. That was helpful, interesting, timely, and timeless, actually. There's a lot of information in this episode that, is really not news pegged to whatever the outcome is of these negotiations with the Taliban. As I said at the outset, please do send me an email. Love hearing from you guys. Love to know what is on your mind, what makes you tick. I say this often, but I put this show together twice a week, every week for you who are listening right now. And so it really helps me to know what is on your mind and to know what interests you. So reach out anytime. All right, see you later. Bye.